What is going on, everybody? I am back today to talk about a film that I recently said I was planning on reviewing. Didn't get to catch this when it was first released. And the film I'm going to be discussing today is The Exorcist Believer. And as you guys saw, I just recently did a rewatch of The Exorcist, praised that movie, talked about how it deserves its status as one of the greatest horror films ever made for a multitude of reasons. And you can go back and watch my review to hear all my thoughts about it. Going into this movie, I was very reluctant, obviously because it's directed by David Gordon Green, who, with his Halloween trilogy, I thought Halloween 2018 was a pretty mediocre reboot of the franchise. I mean, technically it's a sequel to the first film, but they're kind of trying to bring the character back into the mainstream. I thought it had some great kill sequences and some nice atmosphere, but for the most part, I thought it was caught up in some pretty pointless plot arcs. I thought Halloween Kills was absolutely abysmal. One of the worst horror films I've ever watched. Aside from some really brutal kill sequences in the film and the nice intro sequence, the entire middle portion was bloated with this attempted commentary that was so lazily written. Just all the character arcs were so poorly thrown together. I was not a fan, but I was an apologist for David Gordon Green's Halloween Ends. I think that movie is a ton of fun. I liked that they kind of abandoned the Michael Myers character and did something entirely different, because as I said in that, Michael Myers to me just epitomizes evil. There's nothing more to him than he's just an evil dude who killed his sister because he's evil. There doesn't need to be anything else to that story. And so bringing something new into the mix, I thought it was fun and exciting, and I still enjoy that movie more than either of the other ones in the David Gordon Green trilogy. So I was hopeful with the way that he kind of spun that third film and did something very different, that's what he was going to do with this Exorcist film. Pay homage to the original while attempting to do his own thing. And so today I'm going to talk to you guys about The Exorcist Believer. The Exorcist Believer is directed by David Gordon Green. Since the death of his wife 12 years ago, Victor Fielding has raised their daughter, Angela, on his own. But when Angela and her friend Catherine disappear into the woods, only to return 3 days later with no memory of what happened to them, it unleashes a chain of events that will force Victor to confront the nadir of evil and, in his terror desperation, seek out the only person alive who has witnessed anything like it before, Chris McNeil. So, as I said, relatively hesitant to be excited for this film because of how inconsistent the David Gordon Green Halloween trilogy was, but a little optimistic because I did enjoy Halloween Ends, and this movie is horrible. I mean, it's probably in the running for one of the worst horror films I've watched the entire year. And the main reason for that is this movie has absolutely no idea what it wants to be. It doesn't know whether it wants to be original, whether it wants to be an homage to the original film, whether it wants to be a horror film, whether it wants to just be a straightforward family drama. It juggles like 3 different plot arcs to the point where there's no time for you to really stick with these characters and care about each individual one because of how much it jumps all over the place. And I'll break the film apart totally when I tell you a little bit more about the plot. So as the description states, we're introduced to our lead character, Victor Fielding, played by Leslie Odom Jr. He's vacationing with his wife in another country. He's doing a lot of photography, and his wife is pregnant. This earthquake happens. His wife gets caught up in it. They have to rush her to a hospital, and they essentially say, you can either save her or you can save the baby. And then it cuts to present day, and he walks into the kitchen of his house, and his daughter runs into the room, Angela. And we can tell from that moment that the doctors ended up saving the baby, but the wife was lost in the process. And so he's a single father. He's trying to be the best dad that he possibly can be. He takes his daughter to school. We get a little bit of interaction with her and her friends in the classroom. They want to hang out together after school, but Angela's worried her dad's not going to let her. She manages to convince him to let her go hang out with his friend after school. Her and the friend talk about how they're going to use a Ouija board or something to summon up spirits, where Angela wants to talk to her mother, and they go off into the woods together and they don't come back home. And so the parents of the other girl get really scared. They call each other, they talk to each other, and realize something has happened to where the girls haven't come home. So they start this wide search for the girls. They don't come up finding them, and 3 days later, the girls just end up showing up in this barn at this random house. So they bring the girls in, they take care of them, they send them back to their families, and of course, being an Exorcist film, the girls start acting strangely. and the strange behavior turns into more of a possession behavior. And then that is when Chris MacNeil from the original Exorcist film shows up because Victor needs help. He finds her book that she wrote about Regan's possession and thinks that she can give him the information he needs to help his daughter get cured. So, as I said, first problem with this movie, it has no idea what it wants to be. At first, we're introduced to Victor and his daughter, and we think that's going to be the core crux of the film. We're going to stick with these characters, but then we're introduced to this girl and her parents. We're introduced to Chris MacNeil's character, and we're jumping between all three of these characters to where you don't really get enough time with each one of them to really care all that much when things happen to these characters, because it's jumping back and forth all over the place. We also get the introduction of Dowd's character, who is Victor's next door neighbor that also works at a hospital. You can tell that she's very religious compared to Victor's character, who doesn't really practice in his faith whatsoever, and that becomes a conversation in the film, is like the idea of faith and people holding on to their faith. And so that's my big first issue, is that this movie just jumps all over the place and doesn't really give you any time to sit with any character specifically for there to be any emotional payoff. Next is the dialogue. The dialogue in this movie is absolutely horrendous. It gets to levels that it feels like a Lifetime movie, just how overly hokey and dramatic the dialogue delivery is. Most of the performances in this movie, aside from probably Dowd and Leslie Odom Jr.'s performances, who are the two strongest roles in this, the rest of them come off as really cheap, like made-for-TV actors that don't do a very good job with the material that they're presented. And some of the dialogue delivery almost had me laughing just how unintentionally bad it was. And I don't think David Gordon Green recognized when he was directing this film how bad these actors' performances were in the dialogue that they were delivering. Up next would have to be the cinematography. The color grading in this movie is disgusting. It looks horrible. It doesn't add like any sort of eerie or ominous atmosphere. The thing I love so much about the original Exorcist is like it bleeds that fall atmosphere the entire film, and it has this coldness that it radiates that really accents the theme and the mood that the film is trying to convey. This movie just looks like it was poorly shot. There's so many sequences, I complain about this a lot in modern horror, of just really dark scenes that are shot that you can't hardly make out what's in the frame. And it's not because they're trying to hide something from you, it's because it's poorly shot. And so that became really irritating after a while. The shoehorning in of Chris MacNeil's character, it is such lazy screenwriting, and the only reason that it comes into play whatsoever is so that the audience that came to see this film because they love the original has something to hold on to. I think David Gordon Green's idea is like, okay, if no one attaches on to these new characters, I can bring Chris MacNeil in and they'll care somewhat. And they even go as far as to shoehorn Regan back in at some point during the film. And that's just, to me, the laziest route imaginable. All these horror reboots have been doing this. Obviously, David Gordon Green's Halloween brought Jamie Lee Curtis back, but they used her as really the central crux for the story, which I can understand. But the Texas Chainsaw Massacre reboot shoehorned in the lead character. It's like these franchises have no ability to create anything new or to develop a new story. They have to bring back the stuff people already know in fear that people won't enjoy the new material that they're being presented. And that just became so tiresome so quickly watching this movie. And I just did not care about anything that was going on by about the 30-minute mark of this film. It's not scary. There's virtually no atmosphere. It's really just like a random jump scare or a moment where like one of the girls, when she's possessed, says something off color because that's what happened in the original Exorcist. And then the other thing I hated about this movie was how much about the original Exorcist Green tries to mimic, but completely misses the point of it. One of the things in The Exorcist in my review that I talked about that really horrified me was when Regan first starts getting possessed, and there's just little things happening to her. How Chris MacNeil takes her to the hospital and says, we need to get these procedures done on her. And there's these really long take, horrific sequences of Regan being treated and just her crying and screaming in agony. And at the beginning of this movie, when the girls are found, they have this sequence where they're like being checked. They want to make sure the girls aren't assaulted. And it's like they're trying to do the same thing, but it's shot in a way that's so disconnected from the characters. You don't feel any of that tension or that anxiety about it. It's almost like David Gordon Green didn't pay attention to the scene about what makes that so effective and horrendous. It's just like, well, this worked in the original, so I'm going to try to do it in my movie. And that became very frustrating as well, as like not understanding the tone. There's dialogue sequences that reference things in the original film. There's a line about the power of Christ compels you that is like the stupidest line of dialogue that I've heard in a movie all year long. There was the line Chris McNeil said about the patriarchy that I was laughing so hard. Just like, who writes these screenplays anymore? It's just getting really embarrassing. Like, tidy up your screenplays. This thing should never have been as long as it was. It was almost 2 hours, and it was bloated beyond belief. I cannot believe they're supposed to be making 2 more of these. I have no desire to see where they take this trilogy. I hope that they just end up cutting it and saying we're not making this anymore. Unfortunately, with how poor of reviews this got, I think it still made like... It was like $130 million in the box office, and I think the budget was like 30 or 40 million. So it made its money back. There's a good chance that we're going to be getting another one of these, but I just can't be excited for it because this was absolutely horrendous. So have you seen The Exorcist Believer? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you thought. I thought this movie was absolutely horrendous. I have nothing positive to say about it. I was just happy when it was over. As always, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel, helps me out a lot and lets me know the type of content you're looking for. I'm always putting out new material and look forward to getting more out for you in the near future. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.